All right, guys, welcome back. And now we're starting to look at questions that are a little bit more challenging and a little bit more interesting as well. But nonetheless, they're all simple as long as you stick to the basics and draw the diagrams properly. Now, again, before I even read the question, just want to re-emphasize the usefulness of the compass rules, all right, or directional compass to assist us in answering some of these questions, all right? Now, example 4 says, a ship has sailed on a bearing of 162 degrees from a port. Remember the key word here, from, which signifies where the ship is leaving from or the starting point. So, a ship has sailed on a bearing of 162 degrees from a port, and it says illustrate using a diagram. That is what we need to do in part 1 of the question. So let's take a look at that. So I'm just going to put that over there and start the solution to this question. So, quickly. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is determine or put a point that indicates where the ship is leaving from, and it says it's leaving from a port. Now, I'm answering part 1, and I'm just going to put a point that represents the port here, and through that point, I'm going to be drawing a north line. And the north line must be vertical or perpendicular to the ground. So I'm just going to indicate that that is a north line. And again, with these questions as well, remember this part of the line, the north line, is very important. So don't stop it here because it's going to make your solution a little bit more difficult. So just extend this part, it's very important. Okay, the next thing we need to do is determine where approximately where 162 degrees is, and that is where the compass rose comes in. So if you look carefully here, 162 degrees is going to be somewhere between 135 degrees and 180. So we know that the ship is going to be somewhere down here. So we're just going to indicate where the ship is. It's an approximation, so we're good to go. So S is for ship. So I'm going to simply connect the ship to the port, just like this. And what is left for me to do is to indicate using the bearing, using this arc here. So that is going to be 162 degrees. So that takes care of part 1. Now part 2 says, determine the bearing of the port from the ship. Now they want us to tell them the bearing of the port from the ship. So because it says from the ship now, we have to draw a north line through the ship. So let's get with that. So, and remember now, if you remember the key notes, if we're going to draw a second north line on the page, north lines must always be parallel to each other. So ensure that the two north lines are in fact parallel to each other. So I'm just going to indicate that north line. And again, the reason why I'm drawing a north line through the ship is because they're asking us to determine the bearing of the port from the ship. So now we have two north lines on the page. And of course, the north lines must be parallel to each other. They cannot be slanting like that. So they want us to determine the bearing of the port from the ship, which means they want this entire angle here, which would represent the bearing of the port from the ship. Now that angle is massive. And if you look at it, obviously it's more than 180 because angles in a straight line here is 180 because this would be 180 in itself. All right. So this is where now Z angles or alternating angles comes in. And you can clearly see the Z angle there. All right. And what you're going to pick up is that the angle that is here, this 162 degrees here that is in here, will be the same angle inside here. That's 162 degrees as well. That is from here to there. And of course, from here to here is 180 degrees. So that's pretty much straightforward. So if I were to add 180 degrees to 162 degrees, what I would end up with is 340 degrees. It simply means that this massive angle here is 342 degrees. Okay, so the sum of 180 and 162 is 342, and this 342 degrees would in fact represent the bearing of the port from the ship. So to answer part 2, you make a statement: the bearing of the port from the ship is 342 degrees. So that is what you would do. All right, and all of this working out here must be in your solution. All right, now let's take a look at a second example. Let's take a look at this. Again, the compass rose is going to prove useful to us, so we keep that around. So question 5 says, or example 5 says, a tank has been driven on a bearing of 050 degrees from an army base. Illustrate using a diagram. And part 2 says, determine the bearing of the army base from the tank. So let's get cracking with this question. So a tank has been driven on a bearing of 050 degrees from an army base. So it's leaving the army base, and 050 degrees is somewhere in this region. That's why we keep this guy around. So 050 degrees is between 045 and 90 degrees. So let's get with the solution to this question. So, solution. So quickly, the tank is leaving an army base. We're answering part 1. So we're going to put a dot that represents the army base. And through that dot, we're going to draw a north line. So I'm just going to draw the north line here. Very simple. And we know that the tank is somewhere up here. So I'm going to put T for tank. And I'm going to connect the tank to the army base and indicate that angle of 050 degrees right there. 050 degrees. So that is the bearing of the tank from the army base. So I've answered part 1. Now part 2 says, determine the bearing of the army base from the tank. So we have to draw a north line now through the tank, and again, north lines must be parallel to each other. So I'm going to draw this north line here. North lines must be parallel to each other. And the bearing of the army base from the tank would be this massive angle coming around here. Now again, we can break that massive angle into 2 pieces. Again, whatever angle is here, we're dealing with Z angles or alternating angles, that angle would be here. Now you don't put 050 here because this is not a bearing, it's just an angle, unlike this one. Remember, we have to indicate bearings with 3 figures. This is just an angle, so we simply just put 50 degrees. And of course, this is going to be 180 degrees. So, in other words, to get the large angle, just simply add 180 degrees to 50 degrees, and you're going to end up with 230 degrees. So this massive angle out here is going to be 230 degrees. So in answering part 2 of the question, we simply make a statement. In answering part 2, we say the bearing of the army base from the tank is 230 degrees. It's as simple as that. So I hope you guys found this video insightful. When we come back, we're going to look at a third example, example number 6, and then we move on from there. So I hope you guys found this video insightful, and I'll see you guys on the next video.